Now joining me in the studio is former Labor leader Kim Beazley, who is now working as a Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Western Australia, and Tom Switzer, who is a potential Liberal candidate working with the United States Studies Centre. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Can I move straight to the emissions trading scheme and to you, Mr Beazley? You've been out of politics for a while. What do you think of the government's actual legislation as it stands?
Well, look, firstly, can I say this? You won't get that ETS through without a double dissolution. That is my firm view on when you look at the politics of where they are at the moment. They've got a good scheme. They've got a scheme with the endorsement of the Business Council of Australia and of the Conservation Foundation. That's a good enough platform for an election, arguing with your opponents. I don't think the Liberals can ever support that sort of scheme, not without massive divisions within their ranks. And what's going on at the moment is classic opposition fudging, and having been an opposition leader for 7 years, I can recognise it at least a mile. And so that's their situation. They can never support it. The Greens can never support it. Having an ordinary election doesn't change that. Even assuming that the government wins that election, which I think they would at the end of next year, you still would have the same situation applying with the Liberals, with the Greens, and you'd be confronting the same problem. Now, I agree absolutely with David's view about Kevin Rudd's likely attitude to a double dissolution. They won't want it. The only Labor leader I ever knew who loved elections was Bob Hawke. All the rest of them hate it. They won't want it, and it's very inconvenient with the backdating of Senate terms and the like. But if they want their ETS, they're going to have to go for it.
Well, that's pretty pessimistic. If there's not a double dissolution election and you're saying they won't get it through without one, what happens to the emissions trading scheme and our response to climate change?
We won't have one. We will join the ranks of those who feed not the climate change sceptics, but the climate change pessimists, that at the end of the day the world won't cope with it and we'll just have to live with the consequences. The simple fact that the reason why I say you have to have a double dissolution is the joint sitting process which concludes it. That means that the majority in the House can outvote the position in the Senate. And you don't get that. You don't get that joint sitting via any other process. So if we're going to have an ETS, it'll have to be with that joint sitting, and the only way you get that joint sitting is with a double dissolution.
Tom Switzer, you were working for Brendan Nelson at the time that the Coalition was wrestling with it as a policy issue. Do you share Kim Beazley's pessimism?
Oh, not surprisingly, I share the pessimism in the sense that it's very unlikely that we'll get a consensus at Copenhagen in December. And that's why I think Malcolm Turnbull was absolutely right to oppose this legislation, because if we went ahead of the rest of the world and made unilateral action and made these cuts to carbon emissions, it would inflict collateral damage on the Australian economy, I think, particularly as the economy is starting to already feel the pain of the recession coming along. It would inflict higher prices up and down the energy chain. A lot of our energy-intensive industries would be shipped off to countries like China and India that won't conform to any kind of post-Kyoto deal at Copenhagen. So I think Malcolm Turnbull was absolutely right. As for a double dissolution, I think the Liberals, quite frankly, would have a soft spot for that, in the sense that it would be an issue that we could make around jobs and the economy. I mean, the ETS is not just about the environment. The ETS is actually going to slug a lot of energy-intensive industries, and those costs will be borne down on the guy on the street, and that'll further hurt the economy.
But critics of that view would say the government, the Howard government, tried to fight on climate change and lost last election, handing a massive vote to the Labor Party.
Well, I think the politics of climate change have changed dramatically in this country. I mean, I go back to a time when Kim was opposition leader, and it was the month of September of 2006, and that was the perfect storm in climate change politics. You had the Stern report in Britain, you had the Al Gore movie, you had Rupert Murdoch, my old boss, come out and say that he was a believer in the climate change science. We had unseasonal bushfires in Victoria, and from that moment onwards, John Howard and Peter Costello and the government were completely on the back foot, so much so that last year Ross Garnaut, egged on by Penny Wong and Kevin Rudd, was championing that Australia should lead the world, little Australia that emits only 1.4% of emissions into the carbon.
But are you saying we've changed our view so substantially since then that we can, that the that the Turnbull opposition will be prepared to fight an election on a double dissolution on the
I
emissions
think they
trading
can
scheme?
fight it on climate change as well as the economy. On the economy, definitely, because this ETS will hurt jobs. It's all clear. And if the government was so confident, then it wouldn't hurt the economy. Why don't they put it to a productivity commission for it to be subjected? But on the climate change, I mean, it's not like Malcolm Turnbull and the Liberal Party is turning away from taking the threat seriously. They're putting forward in place a series of measures. They've got the target rate at 25% by 2020. They've got this carbon voluntary trading scheme, which they're putting forward to, which allows industry to voluntarily buy the credits. I mean, all of that's good climate change science.
But you tend to be agreeing with Mr Beazley in the sense that you see massive problems with the implementation of an emissions trading scheme. Certainly from the coalition perspective,
well, I certainly think
that would make it very difficult to get implemented.
Well, absolutely. I think before the rest of the world, absolutely. Name one country.
Even with the rest of the world.
Well, that's when the ball game changes. I mean, this is why Malcolm Turnbull's quite right to wait for some kind of global consensus to be reached in Copenhagen. And one of the reasons why I'm so sceptical about it, if we can't reach a global consensus on something as relatively simple as multilateral free trade, and Kim, you've been following these debates for years, we've always had collapse of Doha and the GATT round. If we can't reach a global consensus on free trade, how on earth are we going to reach a global consensus at Copenhagen on something as complicated as climate change?
Well, now, Tom, look, I think the Liberals will be idiots not to endorse you for Parliament. I certainly hope they do, and you've given a very good defence of the Liberal Party's position, which is indefensible. I mean, basically, somebody's got to make a start. You know, this sort of argument can be had in every country around the globe. Right. And sooner or later, somebody's got to come down with a position. Now, the point about the ETS scheme that the government put down on the timing and all the rest of it, they've massaged it through the Business Council of Australia, who says, enough already, get on with it. Yep. And the AIG has come up with something similar. And they're the people who are really going to have to roll with the punches on any economic effects on that. You've got the Conservation Foundation coming out and saying, well, that's the best we can do. You can't have targets without a scheme to hit a target. And Australia basically has to, like every other country on the globe, and many other countries already are now, indeed some US states are, put forward a scheme, get in on the base of it and get going forward with it. But my view on that is that won't be endorsed by the Parliament. That's just not going to happen. Tom's arguments, which are fabulous rationalisations and should, as I said, get him pre-selected because they're very good. Very good argument from a sceptic's or an agnostic's point of view. But at the end of the day, politics is about moving forward with the best compromise that you can get, and they've got the best compromise they can get, but they're not going to get it up. It's not going to go through that Parliament. That Parliament will have to have a double dissolution to get it through.
We'll have to take a break and we'll come back to this. Stay with us here on Playing Politics.